come in. Yeah, I just want to make a little correction. Instead of Eliot, Dalton, it's a Friday. It's now Whitestone Broker. There we go. Making that. Jason is, I'm hoping Jason will come.
No. I'm hearing that he left, but I'm double checking.
All right. That's cool. You know, they heard they were on this panel for ROI, and everybody split. We had another panelist that had signed up. He lives in Bermuda and is part of a large management of short-term rentals. And because of the restrictions of COVID, his wife was traveling to business to New York, and she got quarantined, he got quarantined. They wouldn't be able to get back to Bermuda for the kids. He really couldn't. But we don't need any other panelists. We have Tim. So what we're going to do is I'm going to, a little bit of definition on ROI, because you've heard so much on ROI when it comes to yield and revenue management. There's so much of that. And then there's the whole part with operations, staffing, and CapEx. All those things you have to look at ROI to know what you're going to do and how you're going to approach doing those projects and doing them profitably. So we'll be sort of exploring that. And since the panel is now 2 instead of 4, I'm going to try to engage you a little bit more than has been in the past, because you all have properties, you're all doing capital improvements, you all have these operational things and revenue management. You're all dealing with ROI on a consistent basis. So who better to help us with this than you will? So that's kind of the format. You can hear us without the mic, I would expect?
Yes.
All right, great. So with ROI, I'm just going to give...
Eliot, before you get started, just real quickly, show of hands. How many people own their own properties right now? Okay. And how many, keep your hands up, those that own properties. How many have owned your properties for 5 years or longer? Okay. Thank you.
And how many people here own properties in different asset classes? In other words, short-term rental or boutique hotel or lodge or cabins or anything else? Couples. More than enough.
Okay. And how many of you do not have any property right now and are looking for a property? Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So, ROI. I just got a couple of things here that might help. Economic value resulting from various activities. It's really an accounting term, and so it's really being able to see what you've invested, the equity you get out compared to the cost you to get there. It measures how much money or profit is made on an investment as a percentage of the investment cost. So it's what you do constantly with anything that you're looking at, whether it's going to be in marketing, management, or any of that. What is, at the end, what is that return? Positive, negative, flat. We see this a lot in the food service. I've been talking to a lot of you who have F&B, and it can be the cost and the expense, the revenue and the expense can sort of balance each other out. Why are you doing it? Is it just as an amenity to the guest? Where's the return on investment? Pretty major effort in F&B. And also shows how effectively and efficiently your investment dollars are used to generate a profit. And that's really the key to this. And as I said, there's ROI in everything. And so, although I think that we will talk about that on a revenue basis, I've got some examples in this room, and from what I've heard of people doing a lot of projects, CapEx projects to the property. Terry Hammer, where people in Terry's class, don't forget CapEx in 2022. Don't let that go. But do it so that your ROI looks really good. And how do you do that? Well, you got to figure out what the cost is going to be and what you think the return on that investment is going to be. So we'll be delving couple of questions. So when considering a lodging property for investment, what commitment would you, the buyer, have in running this operation, and how does that affect the bottom line?
Okay, so Eliot's talking about return on investment. Right now, we're talking a lot about revenues and expenses. I want to talk the return on investment on the emotional side as well in this entire process, okay? And why that is really, in essence, part of your return on investment. One of the things, how many of you, and Eliot, we do these seminars for aspiring beekeepers, and normally what we say is, what you should do is have an exit plan on the day that you actually buy your in, right? And I saw all of you that raised your hands, and I want an honest assessment of how many of you had that exit plan when you buy your in. Okay, all right. So, the return on investment starts before you even buy this place, okay? You have to understand as a buyer, and again, the reason we're talking about the buyer side, I'm going to assume, how many of you want to, show of hands, how many of you want to keep your in until you die? Oh, okay. No one did. Great. Wow. Most people prefer to have an investment, they get to a certain point, and they sell it off and run off into the whatever. The point of all of this is this. For you to maximize your investment on a return on investment now, it's really good to go back and understand how a buyer looks at your property before you sell it, okay? And what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, and towards your exit plan, and how you can present this in its most favorable light, okay? And a lot of this is emotion, okay? So what is a buyer looking for, okay? And I'll give you a couple of examples, and this is a true story. I got a call one time, and they said, hey, this is, is this, Hearthside, would I, yes, sir. And he said, you help people to sell in. So I said, yes, sir. I said, that's part of what we do. And I said, how motivated are you? He literally said, well, he said, my wife came in this morning and said, honey, that is the last effing muffin I am ever making. So I said, well, you're a pretty motivated seller. And he said, not as motivated as my wife. Okay? Now, how long have you had it? We've had it for 18 years. And what's the name of your inn? And so as we were talking, I went up to the website while we were talking. Okay? And I can always say, when I get potential buyers looking at your properties to buy, I say, there is this no quotient on the website that tells me how cooked these innkeepers are. How many no's are on the website that says, no talking after 10 o'clock, no drinking, no this, no that. If you do this, we will call the police. If we call, this was on his website. If we call the police and you're taken to jail, you will lose your deposit. Now, we're going to talk about revenue and expenses, right? But this person now wanted to sell his property. Okay? That's all roasted. That's all they're cooked. They're all fried. Are they maximizing their investment of all that work of 18 years by where they are at this point? I haven't even gotten to the financial piece. Okay? And all of a sudden, they're in this lowest state. Okay? Now, why do people get to that point? Okay, it goes back to you as a buyer. When you're a buyer, you have to look at it and say, okay, before I buy this property, one of my first questions I ask people, prospective buyer, we're interested in the dream and buying in and blah, blah, blah. And they say, okay, great. I said, describe for me, if you buy whatever inn you buy, what does it look like and what is your personal day-to-day influence on that property? I want to understand what your personal day-to-day influence is on that property before you even pick a model or whatever type thing. And the purpose of that is to start to understand, and they go, and I've had all these answers, I'm sure Eliot has too. Don't know yet, I'll figure it out when I get after I buy it. Not a really good answer. But the second part would be, well, we're going to be hands-on. Right in, day one, we're going to be hands-on, man. We're going to be doing this, we're going to be doing the cleaning and the washing, and we're going to do the cooking, and we're going to do all those types of things. Others are going to say, we're going to hire a manager, because we're going to say we have men, but we really don't want to be there all the time, so we're going to do that, okay? All kinds of combinations thereof. Now, those two answers could take the exact same in, the exact same P&Ls, and end up with a different result with the new buyers, you see? And you need to understand what your skill sets are as a buyer. You need to understand how to maximize those skill sets in the business model of what you're looking for. This is so critically important. Not only is it important for you to maximize your return on investment, but that puts you in the most favorable light if you're going for financing as well. How many of you, show of hands, paid cash for your in? Okay. Not too many. Okay. Most of you would go through financing. So in this process, as you understand what is it, what am I going to buy, what's it going to look like for me? That's one of my biggest questions. And the reason that that's a big question is as we start to look for the ideal property for these people, we want to maximize it based upon what their goals are, okay? So this is a really important aspect through this. Some people don't know how much they're going to get involved with it, okay? They kind of get into it and they say, well, I'm only going to be there for a while, and then all of a sudden you kind of get sucked in more. You say, that wasn't really what my goal was, but I kind of have to do that too. So having a good business plan is a good idea, but having a better sense of if you were, how many of you, when you bought, had more than one person buying, either there was two of you? Okay. And so when you did that, did you look at your skill sets before you buy and say, this is what I'm going to do, honey, and this is what I'm going to do, honey, whatever. How many went through that process? Okay. So about half of you did not. So this is kind of interesting, okay? So as you go into this process, then all of a sudden, some things can be very overwhelming, okay? And if you don't go through that process first, you, just based on your skill sets, you might not be in, you won't even recognize what the optimal property would be for you. So unless you have somebody that's pretty skilled at doing this, like Eliot or myself or somebody like that, you want to be in a position to have them understand what those skill sets are, match that against what you want to do on a day-to-day basis to establish the most optimal business model that you can do, okay? Now, why is this important for you as the seller? This gets back to return on investment, okay? As you guys do the CapEx programs every year, how many of you review your CapEx every year? Okay. So as you do that, you're looking ahead, and if you're working towards an exit plan and you've got this CapEx program, what you want to do is to be able to be in a position as the seller to consistently create a quality product, NOI, all the way through right up to when you're selling, based on your exit plan. And if you are consistent, okay, it's easier for a buyer to recognize you as a good quality place, and it's easier for us to find those properties that are optimal and also can help the banker to see you as a consistent product, okay? So that part becomes really, really important. And it can change once you get your property. How many of you kind of changed a little bit what happened once you bought your property? Gee, there's a surprise, okay? And that's a normal process as well, okay? So as you go through this process, you got to make sure that that piece is in place as well.
Jason. What are the biggest opportunities you see for improving ROI for typical small lodging product? I don't know, Eliot. Clueless. So, when that question is asked, so individual. I mean, every property is different. Your whole CapEx and operations systems and budgeting and all those things are different for each. So I was talking to somebody last night. They have a full service inn and quite a few rooms. And they came to me with 3 things in their CapEx, 3 ideas. What would be the best thing for them to do? And I think you'll be able to answer this pretty quickly. So they spent quite a bit of money filling in and leveling an area so they have more outdoor space. They sort of took over some wetland and put down a lot of bedrock and gravel, so they now have this flat surface or fire pit that they're going to put in, comfortable seating, views, and all of that. It's not a lot of cover there, so I got to figure, you have to figure that out. So there's some shade, some kind of park or whatever. The second is lighting, outdoor lighting. They do not have the building lit properly. So obviously we have, what's the name of there's at least one vendor, right? Outdoor lighting. So they talked with them and got the price, and it looked like it was about the same as that patio. There was some little nuances there, but about the same amount of investment in that. And then the third thing was that last year they have a deck, and they like to expand that. They have dining, so people would like to do al fresco. Everybody does. But as my son said when he went to Maine canoeing, Dad, we got no seams, we got the black flies, we have mosquitoes, we have what are they called? Those nasty ones in Massachusetts that take a piece of you with you.
Boston Red Sox game.
They do that. But he said, Dad, up in upstate, way up in northern Maine, they got moose flies. And when they bite, you really know. So they were having a little problem just with the little guys, the mosquitoes. So they were thinking of enclosing the deck. Because last year, there were people going out, they really wanted to go out, and they put on butt stuff, and they tried to do it, but then would come back into the restaurant. So they couldn't fill those seats. They always had to leave seats open for those wimps that couldn't take it and take it back. So losing revenue, no doubt. They couldn't go to the basket. So thinking of screening in the porch, maybe doing it a 3-season where you have the clips or the snaps or the zippers, where it's a little bit covered so that the wind's protection and then screening so you can see out. A, B, or C? What do you think would be the highest ROI?
C.
B? Oh, well, I think it's a screened porch. For me, it's a no-brainer. Right? However, guest satisfaction, repeat guests, all of that, they're not so concerned. So long as there was a place for them to eat, it didn't affect that. They got that. They didn't know that they were displacing somebody else that would be there. Certainly, if they came up to the property and it was fully lit the way those guys do that, it makes it absolutely gorgeous. Maybe, personal choice, they want to really give the guest satisfaction. So you've got to know exactly what it all costs and what it's going to give you in return. Is that lighting going to bring you a lot more repeat guests? Is the patio and outdoor? What is that cost, and what kind of gain are you going to get from it? So I think there's somebody, Matthew, who is undergoing a lot of projects at the moment. You're expanding rooms. You are leveling out your property that's on a hill so that you have terraced gardens and places to stay. What else are you doing? You're doing a lot. And so as you move forward, I know how you two operate. It's just all in. So let's get this done. Did you CapEx? Did you look at return on investment? I'm just going to ask you that flat out, if I may. You don't have to answer if you don't want to. Go ahead.
Yeah, but I think it's a lot of guesswork for us still. So we've been at this for 4 years. We're expanding. It's a small 5-room inn. We're about to go to 10 with the cottage. And ever since we got there, we've just been dumping money into the property. My background is in construction, as Eliot knows, and that's just what I love. So if we get a nickel, we invest it back in. And so my constant
So you use the term we, who's the we?
My wife.
Okay, so when you do this CapEx, I'm just kind of curious about your process, and this I think is really, really important on your return on investment, okay? You and your wife, I'm gonna take a wild guess that sometimes you don't always agree. Is that a fair statement?
It is.
Okay, so in this process, when you only have so much money to spend, and you're looking where to spend it, okay, and you want to hammer nails and whatever she wants to do with it, okay? In this process, when you establish a process, oftentimes you don't agree. And yet, there could be two very viable return on investment opportunities here, you see? Which one wins, okay? And in that process, when we had the round barn, for example, my partner, and I think the round barn didn't always agree, famously. But what happened was, when you establish a process to take the emotion out of that and move it back, and I'm going to suggest this to you. So, for example, if you have 2 of you or 3 of you, whatever, or departments, depending how big you are. We had like 4 different departments, okay? So what I used to say was, okay, we always would spend the CapEx, you know, in November, December, right, the year end. Hey, we got some money, let's do this now, type thing. We started the process of deciding what to spend back in September or August. And we went to those 4, we went to our chef and said, give us your wish list for next year. Then we went to the front desk, then we went to accounting and bookkeeping, then we went over to events, you know, give us your, now, give it to us now, back then. In that process, and we said, and rate them, and tell us why. So as you went through this process, okay, the chef obviously wanted to always hang in the kitchen stuff, right? And housekeeping always wanted new vacuums or whatever it might be. But the point of all this is that through that process, if you rated, if you just looked at your one CapEx thing, you might find one that is number 2 on one list, number 1 on another list, number 4 on another list, and by points or whatever, you say, wow, we spend our money here, we're not gonna make everybody happy, but we get a really good return on our investment because each of these are recognizing that type of a piece to happen. Does that make sense? Okay? And if you do that process all the time, and everybody knows in August or September, we're gonna ask for your list to prep us to do all the buying and do everything that we wanted to do in time for November to start spending. You're establishing everybody to look, but you're also teaching them their own return on investment, okay? I just throw that out there. So whoever your we's are, okay, I would suggest that you create that in place for you, if that makes sense.
Tim, I have another question for you.
Okay.
How are financial institutions looking at hospitality properties differently in lieu of the most recent pandemic environment?
Okay. Well, financial institutions, by their nature, as Bob both used to say, a bank will never loan you money until you can absolutely prove you don't need it. That was it pre-pandemic. With pandemic, it's like, okay, let's take this to a whole nother level. Now, historically, what I used to tell aspiring keepers, I said, save your monies, et cetera, and if you look for a property, they're usually looking for 20% down. They want you to have the 20% down, they want you to have the working capital, and then they want you to have reserve. And we'll get back to reserve in a second, because this is really important. So that was the pre-pandemic levels, okay, that a bank would normally look for, all right? One thing I learned a long time ago is that bankers, commercial lending bankers, give you a really nice business card and you think their biggest fear is, oh my God, we gotta get another loan. We have to get another loan, that's my job. That is not their biggest fear. Their number 1 fear, by far, is they never wanna look stupid in front of the loan committee. Enough so that if there's not enough in that business plan, if there's not enough really good on the NOI or that they can perceive as an ROI, they don't even take it to the loan committee. It doesn't even make it there. You send them the information, 3 days later they look at it, they don't understand it, it's looking a little shaky, and there's certain reasons why it's shaky. They will just leave it on the desk, And when you call 3 days later and you say, hey, so what's going on? You know, I'm sorry, it just didn't quite work out. Never even made it to the loan committee, okay? Now, there's reasons why it doesn't make it to the loan committee. They don't think it's a good ROI, but where is it that it breaks down? It could be in many different cases. But when I say you have working capital, whatever that is, that's a pretty finite number, usually, on whatever property you work with. You're 20% down, of course, depending upon what the sale price is. I think with the pandemic now, what I found, and I think probably Eliot did too, the banks are saying, well, look, we're not going to play with you unless you're at 30 to maybe 40% down at this point to minimize our risk, okay, on that basis. But the other two things that are critically important for the bank, even at the 30 to 40%, in my experience, has been that property is in good physical shape, and it has a history prior to 2020 of having consistent cash flow that was very solid, okay? And on that basis, they say, okay, we might be willing to, take the risk, make the thing happen. Now let's go back to the reserve. The reserve could be a really big deal based upon the condition of the property. So how many of you got like PPP money or federal grant monies through the pandemic? Okay. How many of you took that money, put it into some kind of CapEx program? Okay. So the winners on that is somebody that can turn around and say, okay, we didn't have a lot of staff, or we didn't have a lot of guests coming through here, but we were keeping the property up through this process. Even the banks, they correct me if I'm wrong, but even all the banks that I had in the last year and a half when the pandemic hit, even they didn't give you a problem with 2020 numbers. They understood that was like, it might be an excuse for them, but nobody gave you an excuse, put that on you, okay? But what they hung their hats on were, did you keep the property up, even though you didn't have, whatever, that type of thing, so that when you're coming out of it, how many of you have done better in 2021 than you did in 2020? Raise your hands. Okay? So what's happening is you're seeing that, now the trend is coming back out, the banks are seeing that as well, you see? And they're seeing that 2020 dip, and oh my God, and they're not putting that on you. But now if you were in a position to sell, and I'm in a position to buy from you, the bank's saying, this in, they're coming out, they did okay, blah, blah, blah. They didn't put any money into their in the last 18 months. But these guys, they did. And I, as a banker, I'm turning around saying, this loan that comes across might get a better likelihood of going to the loan committee than that loan, you see. So that part of it becomes really, really important. How do they answer it? It doesn't mean they won't discount that loan or eliminate the loan completely, but here's what they'll do. They'll turn around and say, for this property, maybe they're the exact same size, for this property that's really in good shape and has the same occupancies or the same NOIs or whatever, I'm going to have the working capital required, I'm going to have the down payment at 30, 35%, but your reserve is going to be maybe $50,000, just in case type stuff. Everything else will be the same over there except the reserve, because they're saying, okay, these guys put money into their place, these guys did not put money into their place. I'm going to, same NOI, the same whatever, but now that reserve, it could be $100,000, $150,000, whatever it might be. Now, what's the difference on that? If these guys are both selling at the same time, and Eliot's got one buyer, you see, and they're just about the same for the buyer, that they like them both, but now they go to the banks, okay? It's the one that gets the sales, the one that gets the financing, you see? So that CapEx becomes really important, and it's not just about the P&L at that point, through that process. Does that make sense? Okay? I literally had a guy, I'll tell this story, but it was
Jason's left the room.
I know. We're trying to do a filler here, but it's a true story. So I called the guy and I said, hi, we have a buyer that wants to buy an inn in your town. And he said, oh, what's the name of the inn? I told him the name of the inn. He goes, oh, I know that inn. You guys are awesome inn. He said, I drive by it every year for 18 years on my way to work. My wife and I have had anniversary dinners there, we've gone to weddings, we've gone to blah, blah, blah. I said, great, we're gonna send you a business plan. You wanna play? He goes, yeah, we wanna play. Send us the information. Send me the information. The buyer, I told him, help the buyer put it all together, send it off to the bank. I didn't have the buyer call the bank. I called the bank. Okay? So 3 days later, I said, so how's it going? Yep, I received it. I wanted to make sure he was at least considering it. I received it, you know, blah, blah, blah. I said, great. And I said, okay, when can you get us something back, you know? And he said, I'll probably get it within 24 hours. I said, great. Comes back in 24 hours, and he says, okay, like the place, like this, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Oh, by the way, when we had put in, I think it was maybe at the time 50,000 for reserve. We had the working capital in there. We had the working capital and reserve and the closing costs in there. He came back from $50,000. He said, okay, we will consider this, but now we want $200,000 put into our bank that you can't touch for 2 years. Okay? Now, nothing changed in the P&L. Nothing changed on the quality of the property, you see? And he said, wait a minute, what's going on here? So in that process, he had to go back through, and I had to call him back. The buyer went crazy. Okay? I was trying to think of the word, so, but he was very upset. Okay? It was going to kill the deal, the entire deal. Okay? So I called the guy back, the banker. I said, okay, what's going on? What's happening here? So he said, well, Tim, he said, you know, these people have no experience. Okay? So I have to treat this as a startup company. Okay? And I immediately knew when he said that he did not have faith at all in this business plan at all. It was never going even to the loan committee. He threw that $200,000 in there to protect his own butt. Okay? And it never even made it to the loan committee at this point. I said, well, this isn't going to fly. It's just not going to fly. And I said, and by the way, I said, you aren't looking at this property the right way. He said, how do you mean? I said, well, we just had this conversation. You're treating it as a startup property. I said, you just told me you drove by this place for 18 years. Your wife has had anniversary dinners, you've gone to weddings, you've had all these things. These are great. They've always paid. I said, and he goes, yeah, but they don't have experience. And I said, go to page 4, and here's the list of all the staff. There's 14 staff here. Average age of those staff is 8.5 years with this property. The 2 owners are going to leave. These 2 new people are going to come in, and they've never had experience before. And I said, but 14 out of 16 have 8.5 years of experience, and they're not going anywhere. Never read it. Never read it. Okay? I said, we put in a building inspection thing ahead of time, which is on page whatever. This place has the new roof, has this, has all these other things. You didn't read that either. Okay? These people, the owners had put in a lot of return on investment to prepare for the day they're going to sell. They put the money in there. Okay? They didn't want to put the money in there because they were a good guy for the buyer. They were putting the money in there to make sure that that property was up to speed for when they were ready to sell, to make it easier for the bank. Okay? And the bank never saw it. Okay? Had I not followed up and given them what I call Paul Harvey the rest of the story, that thing would have been a dead deal. And I said, so I gave them the bullets and the gun. I said, you have the staff there. It is in good shape. They have their CapEx program is rock solid, and it's there on page 9. Go through, you know, whatever. And all of a sudden, I could see the aha moment with this guy, where all of a sudden he's going, I have the bullets and the gun now, the confidence, to now go to the loan committee, which I didn't have before this conversation. Even though that seller had done everything with the CapEx, had a great reputation and all those other pieces. Okay? So that's where these things can fall down. Anyway, next day, he comes right back, $200,000 was gone, and they took the deal. And they've been up to the races ever since. Okay? So this return on investment, you kind of have to sell it as well, okay, and on how that works. Sorry.
No. seen in the last couple of years, as the average price of commercial real estate has been going up, obviously there's been downward pressure on the yield or the cap rate. And so, the Fed's going to be looking at this, and they're going to be looking at interest rates. And I've sort of at this conference been telling people, I'm thinking maybe 50 basis points or 0.5% the first time around. How's that going to affect? Not so much. But if they raise it 100 the first time and 100 the second time, and we're talking a couple of percent by the end of the year, that's going to affect your yield. You being a new buyer or somebody expanding their business and leveraging with money, right? When that spread starts to tighten, your profit margin starts to tighten. And so, Terry's always an inspiration when I hear him, and it's like, you can't be operating on 19, you can't be operating on 20 first. And 21 is kind of an anomaly. So what are you doing? You're looking at all of them, just like you would look, as Tim says, at everything with your investment in CapEx or revenue management or anything like that. So, an investor is looking for a return that's at least as good as the S&P 500, right? They're looking for that. And that, for the last, since 1957, it's been something around 10.5%. Adjusted for inflation, 7%. So wouldn't it be nice to get a cap rate above 7? Yes, that's what we shoot for sure. But it's been, as these cap rates have been dropping, it's been really difficult. Now that should be lifted, I hope. But it's something you need to consider at all times while you're doing this. I want to,
Elliot, can I ask you a question?
no. I'm the moderator. I didn't prepare for this.
I know.
Go ahead.
I'm throwing you out there. So, with the buyers that you've had in the last year and a half or whatever, the reason I'm asking this from a CapEx perspective, is there a buyer profile that you have that's a little different than you had prior to the pandemic?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And what are the big prioritized needs?
Most of them, the financing, obviously, are going to have to bring more capital to the table. You're absolutely right about that. Instead of the 20%, a lot of people are looking for 30, 35, 40. Just as Tim said at the beginning, you don't need, if you need the money, they're gonna love to lend it to you. If not, they're gonna make it tough. The people that have been buying these properties, if they're in really good shape, it's pretty easy for a bank and them to get the deal through. For those properties that the inspections find a lot of things wrong, I have had the same thing. Bank asked for escrow. Seller needed to put 50 grand in escrow before they would close the property. And the new buyer would take care of those things that were brought up in the inspection. I have never had a bank, up until now, ask for the inspection report. And 2 banks did that this past year. I'd never had it. We negotiated that between buyer and seller. Here's the inspection. I think that, the sill plate's crumbling, and you guys need to fix that. And the seller says, well, yeah, I guess I do. But with, GFIs, no, I'm not fixing it. The buyer goes, okay. But now the bank has it. And now they're making decisions as to what you need to do to the property as a seller. That's weird. That's different, And so that's another big one. So I think that people are willing to purchase knowing that 2021 was an anomaly, just like 20 was. 19 was weird, even to 18. A lot of people didn't have such as good a year even in 19 as they did in 18. Some people had a much better, but there's always play, and so I think that going forward, it's going to be all new, just like that bank was asking for that. You're all buyers and sellers. This is a flexibility, just like you're doing with your guests. This is new territory. I don't have answers. It's all different. It's really different, and the lenders are all different. It's unfortunate that hospitality has always been shoehorned into hotels, and since hotels collapsed. So did you guys. No, you didn't, but they don't know that. So their portfolios are really limited as to how many hospitality properties they're gonna take. So you're kind of in that boat, so we have to really struggle as people representing buyers to give them all the motivation and data and everything else to show the bank that, no, these are independent logical. One of the things, not even Jason, who didn't show, but there was another gentleman who works in a lot of short-term rentals, and that's their gig. And so there's somebody I met here at the conference that has both short-term rentals, Airbnb properties, and lodging properties. And the lodging properties are all different. You know, they're looking at different demographics. So one's a converted motel.
Sorry, can you just clarify the difference, what you mean between short-term rentals versus Airbnbs?
I sort of group them together.
Okay.
That's me. Does anybody have a real difference between them? Let me get the question. Maybe this guest appearance might help me out because they're the expert on that. But when you're looking at returns, many of you have taken rooms and put in an amenity, some sort of kitchen without a stove, cabins. You know, we've been talking ad nauseum, going, get people outside so you can have families here, like pets, and do all these things. What's the return on investment compared to expanding a room at the inn? What's the return on investment instead of buying a property next door in a separate flat and doing short-term rental? That's what this other analyst was going to speak to, and I was really interested. Mike, would you be able to share the difference in those asset classes as based on return on investment, basically, and basic analytics?
Yeah, it fundamentally is not that different. So our company manages about 400 vacation rentals through a geographic area in North Carolina. And, there's two sets of buyers for that. There's second home vacation owners, and then there's investors. So, when an investor comes in and they're looking and analyzing and underwriting these properties, when we talk about performance, their number one thing they're looking at is cash on cash return. So how much cash do I put in this deal, and what's my return on that cash after everything's said and done? So those are getting harder and harder to find acceptable cash on cash return.
What's accept? I mean, I've been all of a sudden those numbers have gone up for me. My investors are, instead of looking for 15, are now looking for 25.
So generally, from the risk profile, if you're not looking north of 20, it's probably not a worthwhile endeavor. Because there is so much volatility, right? I mean, like we saw, you mentioned 18 and 19. It's a relative struggle to fill in those weeks. And then when 20 hit, and then in 2021, it's like shooting fish in a barrel, right? It's pretty easy and things are looking up, which has allowed a spotlight to be shown on that industry. So now there's more and more people piling in, and it's easier to get a loan on a residential property than it is to get on an inn, like we were discussing. So, it's not necessarily, we look at them as complementary. So I don't think short-term rentals, are necessarily competition in their own right to like a boutique inn. Because it's two different sets of people staying there. Vacation rentals are generally going to be, groups or families. Inns are going to be generally couples, right? And then vacation rentals are generally longer-term stays, 3-4 nights per week, versus inns are probably 2-3 nights. So it's complementary in our book, but we manage the rental side, we own it on the inn and hotel side, so that's also another concept.
Yeah, for sure.
I was going to say, what you're pointing out, you said some of your market is the second homeowners, and then they give it back to you, correct, for property. Big thing that I saw with the pandemic, we were talking about CapEx for you and your inns, is that these buyers are coming in way more educated, more researched, with more money than what innkeepers were, or potential buyers were even 5, 6 years ago, okay? But the thing that drives them is they want to get out of big cities. It's a lifestyle thing. If they want to come in here and say, forget corporate America, get me out of the big city, I want to come over here. The big difference that I've found when you're thinking CapEx is how more important the owner's quarters are in these inns than they were even 5 years ago, okay? Hugely different, okay? And it's different because they're saying, I'm not only buying a second home and coming to visit every once in a while. I'm picking up, leaving corporate America, I'm jumping from New York to Boston, wherever I'm going, from New Jersey, I'm moving up to Warren, Vermont, and I'm saying, I want to have a place that it's not just a business for me, and it's a lifestyle for me, but it's a home that fits my lifestyle and my business. So oftentimes, when we had it like at the Round Barn and stuff, we were always putting the money out in front to all these different things for the guests, et cetera, et cetera. You might want to look at some of that to start saying, I was okay with these owners' quarters when I first got here, but the new buyers might not be, so can I fix them up? Can I add a kitchen? Can I do, those kind of things as well? Yes?
Yeah, just to add on before you go, that the last 4 inns that I've sold that haven't been investors, that have been couples, detached owners' quarters. It was absolutely key that, just like Tim said, that was a very important part of that property being sold.
Yeah, right, so we have a 5-room inn, and we took a lot of the grant money stuff we got last year and did some real big capital improvements. We put a new roof on, we did a lot of work on the wood trim and fascia. And we were able to pay cash for that because we had the cash to be able to do it. So it was like, wow, let's get this done. So now we're looking at a couple of other things. We have a stone building that is currently storage that needs a roof in a real bad way, entire roof structure, not just a shingles. We can think about monetizing that in terms of spa space. Or we can go upstairs in our in our owner's quarters and put in a separate kitchen for the owner's quarters. Or we have a carriage house in the back, essentially a barn that could be event space. And I have a pot of money that I can use, that I think I'll have this year to use for that. Which way do I go?
What are your prioritized needs? And when I ask this, where are you in your business life? Are you thinking?
We're 3 years into about a 9-year plan.
Okay, because to answer those questions, it might make a difference. I'm not saying you have to fix your owner's quarters right now if you're not planning to sell for 9 years, you see what I mean? But you need to start thinking about that. And so in the meantime, if you want to have expanded markets, different additional silos, you have to understand what market you want, if it's spas or whatever you want to do, and what are their prioritized needs for that market. And will that money give you the greater return faster? Because you're still in the operation mode. But Eliot, myself, whatever, when you guys call us and say we're ready to sell, what do we always say? Give us 3 years and back up. Give us 3 years of your financials, okay? That's what we want. That's what a bank is going to want, okay? So as you're starting to do that, and all of you, went to Bermuda 5 times and everything like that and wrote it off, okay? That's okay if you're still in the operation, but if you're going to go to self, you're hurting yourself. So that would be the same thing. But on the back end, I think owner's quarters expansion or whatever, or quality or whatever, becomes really important based on the trends that we've seen. Yes, ma'am.
So I have a question. We have an inn that, same thing, 5 bedrooms and conditional use permit and all that stuff. Right now we're running it lifestyle, projecting to sell it. And the inn is designed in that we don't have to take care of the ADA compliance because it's a historic home and because we live on site. The minute that we are not living on site, then it, extrudes all these requirements and
comfort level when somebody comes in there? How many of you went in there, looked at your owner's quarters and thought they were substandard when you bought it? Raise your hand. Okay? And why did you not care? You didn't care because at first you said, I really don't care, I'm gonna be too busy, I'm not even gonna have time to sleep, right? Right? So all of a sudden, it wasn't a big deal, okay? And when you're in the beginning of your operating life, it's maybe still not a big deal. But as you start working towards the back end of that, it might be a big deal. Look what Eliot just said. 3 of his properties that he just sold had independent lodging kind of off property, off the building. What if, back to your question, you turned around and you had maybe, 3 acres or whatever you had, and you put a cabin on the property that you're okay with your owner's quarters right now, and so you can run that operationally, and then that can become an owner's quarters for the next people down the road. So now you have a CapEx where it's not an either or, it's both. And just, it depends where it's going to fit in your operational history. Does that make sense?
Before, I think we need to, we gotta get off the lunch or everybody's gonna be freaking out. So if we could give a round of applause for Tim and James.